It is great to be hanging out with Ricky O'Donnell of SB Nation and John Wasserman from Bleacher Report. It is day number 2 of the NBA Draft Combine. We have one of the finest concrete backdrops, guys, I think, in all the Midwest behind us here inside the Quest Multi-Sport facility. And I don't know, I feel like day number 1, it's just kind of like a whirlwind of activity. You try to get adjusted. Day number 2, things tend to settle down a bit, but we'll just go by order of who is sitting closest. Rick, just day number 1 overall, like how much do you enjoy being a part of this and being here where it seems like the draft season really starts to get underway and tip off?
Yeah, it's always fun. This is the 5th straight year I've covered it, living in Chicago. It's short travel for me, and it is just a fun event every year. Now, I do think that probably as far as the players available to the media, this might have been like the weakest year. Like maybe no one in the lottery has talked yet. I think Zach Collins is going to speak today, so will De'Aaron Fox. So it'll be interesting to talk to those guys a little bit. But, the one thing that always jumps out to me is just how young these players are. Yesterday, Hamidou Diallo, after he had the 44.5-inch vertical leap, he said, well, it was really cool to beat the mark set by one of my childhood heroes, Andrew Wiggins. Andrew Wiggins is 22 years old. That was Hamidou Diallo's, when he was a sophomore in high school probably. That was his guy. So it's just incredible how quickly it goes for some of these top prospects from high school to the NBA. And, you see it every year here.
Their youth is definitely humbling. And it seems like, some of them have played on big stages, John. I didn't detect a ton of wide-eyed reactions inside the media room yesterday as, guys really this almost, it seems like, kind of functions as a 2-day social event for some of the top power brokers in the league.
That's exactly what this is. It's like a big networking event. I don't even know if half the people here are actually watching the games or really care what the kids have to say. It's, NBA executives meeting other NBA executives that they haven't seen, talking to scouts, college coaches, talking to NBA guys. A lot of these NBA guys, particularly the executives, the coaches, they've never seen these players before live. It's the scouts who do the traveling, and they report back to the executives. But this is the first time the executives get to see these college kids, get to talk to these college kids. And I think that's really the most important thing, is putting a face to a name and really, getting a feel for who these players are up close.
So Ricky and John, they are on this beat covering prospects all season long. They're familiar with it. That's why we brought them here, to give you better insight as to how things might shake out in the draft. Why don't we start first with, and we just kind of danced around a little bit right there. We'll go, John, to you first. The Combine. What are the advantages? There's so much talk about who participates in what can you glean from it. What do you think the priorities are of some of these teams around the league?
Well, I think the most important thing is the interviews, particularly for the top guys. They're not playing, but they meet with the teams, and I think that's big for them because there's these scouts. They've been watching these kids for years, but this is the first time they get to meet them and talk to them. And I think more than ever right now, teams are putting more stock into character and work ethic. And you hear all the wild questions that they ask these kids. I think Frank Mason got asked yesterday how he wants to die, how he'd go out.
Real uplifting question.
Yeah, so I do think it's a good opportunity. I know a lot of people will say, nobody plays, nobody puts stock into the Combine. I disagree, and I think, if you watch Kyle Kuzma from Utah yesterday, there's no doubt he had to have helped himself. He was a really, really good player, a standout player yesterday. I think it's a good opportunity for some of the second-round guys or other guys trying to get into the first round to make an impression, to open eyes. Like, for example, Svi Mykhailiuk from Kansas yesterday. A lot of the guys who were sitting around me, they had never seen him play, and he starts shooting and he starts opening up eyes, he starts generating some buzz. So I think you can really get people to know who you are for the first time, because like I said before, this is the first time a lot of the NBA guys are seeing him live.
Feel the same way, Ricky?
Yeah, I guess, you have to contrast it against the NFL Combine, and I think in the NFL Combine, a guy could go from, a mid-round pick to, a top 5 pick based on his athletic testing or something like that. In the NBA Draft Combine, that doesn't happen. To me, it seems like the most important stuff is the stuff you don't see. As John said, the private meetings between executives and players and things like that. But, definitely, some of the athletic testing is definitely important. You saw what Diallo did yesterday, create a lot of buzz. As soon as Diallo had that vertical leap, everyone on Twitter was like, oh, he's gone. That's it, he's gone. 44 inches, he's out. So, certainly I think the agility test has had added influence in recent years. So it's always interesting just to see how they measure up. The one thing I do wish is that everyone went through the athletic testing, sort of similar to the NFL draft. Yeah. just to see, like, here's where LeBron was at the three-quarters court sprint, and here's where Kevin Durant was at the agility test. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen, but, it's still a nice event just to, bring everyone together under one roof between the prospects and the executives.
We're going to cover broad topics. We'll get into some of the nitty-gritty, but you mentioned the name Hamidou Diallo, a guy who spent the season with Kentucky but did not appear in a single game. Is he one of the more intriguing stories, you think, surrounding this pre-draft process as we approach the period where teams start to work players out?
Yeah, definitely. Listen, we saw last year the Bucks take Don Maker at number 10 overall after not playing in college, and we know that teams are willing to chase upside, and they're willing to wait a couple years on the player. And you saw the vertical leap from Diallo yesterday. We know about the athleticism. Clearly not polished in terms of his skill level, but that's something that can always improve. And listen, most of these guys are not NBA ready anyway. I mean, I hate that term because so few guys can come in and make an impact. But if you're in the 20s and you're looking for a long-term upside type guy, I mean, I don't know how you can at least consider someone like Diallo, even though he doesn't have any college production to show for it.
Yeah, covering college basketball for SB Nation, I always take one trip out to the AAU leagues. And I saw Diallo last year play in the Nike League, the EYBL, and it's really just crazy how quickly it goes, from that level to potentially being in the NBA. It's just like absolutely night and day. But to John's point about being NBA ready, being based in Chicago, growing up a Bulls fan, I know that, when the Bulls took Denzel Valentine last year, one thing they like to say was, oh, he's, 23 years old, he's NBA ready. Denzel Valentine did not play a single meaningful minute in the playoffs this year, even after Rajon Rondo's injury. So, what does that term really mean? I think it's definitely something that, Scott should be a little skeptical of as the draft approaches.
And if, sometimes, again, we said this is the first time we are venturing into this realm, and someone was probably bound to draw the short straw. So if John's mic is a little bit low, we're going to try and effort that on the side. Sounds good in the cans, but maybe it's having a little bit of a issue making its way onto the good old Facebook Live universe. Other standouts from yesterday as far as the scrimmages, because I feel like that also too kind of gets lost. It's an opportunity to see how some of these guys react to new settings where they're obviously playing with guys that they have probably very little familiarity with for the most part. New coaches, just a couple days to cram and get used to things. A new three-point line, that whole thing. Anything from the scrimmages that really jumped off the page?
From what I saw, and this is no surprise, but Frank Mason looked great. National College Player of the Year this past season. He was a monster for Kansas all year, and he's someone who his size is always going to be the knock on him. I don't even know if he measured over 6 foot. I didn't see the official measurement on him, but he's right around there. But his improvement as an off-the-dribble shooter this past season as a senior was just phenomenal. And if his range extends beyond the three-point line, yeah, it's going to be tough for him to play defense. But I think there's just so much value in that extra shooting range and being able to make threes off the dribble that I wouldn't be surprised if he carves out a spot in the league for some time as a second-round pick.
Sure. He better get drafted. It would be pretty crazy if he didn't get drafted. He's just too good of a basketball player. I thought Jordan Bell yesterday was the guy who stood out most to me, and he may not have one really NBA skill, but it doesn't matter in terms of his athleticism, his motor. That guy was all over the place. I think he had 5 blocks, he had 5 assists, made the right plays, always put himself in position to make those plays. I wouldn't be surprised if a team in the late first round looks at Jordan Bell and says, we're going to take this guy to come in and run the floor and pick up a couple hard fouls, set screens, rebound, block shots. Don't make one dribble, but make plays. And I think that's what Bell showed yesterday he could do. He could fill up the stat sheet without really taking a shot outside the paint or making a dribble.
From the best you guys can gather, as we not only are talking about the draft, but try to do a quick microphone change as well. From the best that you guys can gather, how much of the projections for the draft are set at this point? I'm sure there's a lot that can fluctuate in the later stages, but in what areas do you feel like the draft might be kind of set, or there's some definition to it right now?
I think the top. I think in terms of tiers, it's mostly set. There's a group of guys in that top 12 range who could go in any order, but you kind of expect them, the same 12 guys, to go in the top 12. And then there's the mid-first round guys, the Donovan Mitchells and maybe the OG Anunobis, who are going to go somewhere in that 13 to 22 range. And then really in the 23 to 30 range, it's anybody's guess. But I think in terms of tiers, it's pretty much set, except for the end of the first round.
All right, we're going to take a quick moment. We're going to have a new technical adjustment on the fly. I'm going to ask and we've already asked you two a lot, but if the two of you could pass this microphone back and forth, I think, yeah, sure, take them off. Let the follicle area breathe a little bit, and I think hopefully, as we get more feedback from our good old Facebook Live viewers and listeners out there,
Facebook.
All right, great. Yeah, that should, I think, do the trick.
Cool.
Hopefully. All right. So as we were saying, how much of the draft is defined at this point?
Well, yeah, it's like no one thought Thon Maker was going to go 10 last year, right? And then when he went 10, everyone thought that was a huge reach at the time, and he ended up playing really meaningful playoff minutes as a rookie. So I think it fluctuates. I mean, yesterday, Draft Express raised Donovan Mitchell from in the mid-20s to like number 12, I think, which I personally was a little bit bummed out by that because I had Mitchell around that point, and now it no longer looks like that interesting of a take. Now it's going to become the consensus. But I think, a lot of it is still in flux. And, it's going to come down to the order, really. Teams are going to draft for need to a certain extent within the top 10. And like John said, the tiers are, at this point, pretty much determined, especially towards the top of the draft.
Let's talk about some of the, at least from who we heard of yesterday. And you mentioned Donovan Mitchell, a guy who is a projected first-round pick. We heard from Justin Jackson yesterday speaking as well at a UNC and what he was able to do in his final season there. Rab spoke. We heard from John Collins as well out of Wake Forest. For those guys, just maybe a thumbnail sketch, John, of where you think some of those players might be at this stage.
Well, I think Justin Jackson's an interesting guy because he was so off the radar after 2 years. He was such a big-time high school guy and then underwhelmed his first 2 years, and then this year comes out and drills 105 threes and leads North Carolina to a title. I think he's a high-character guy. I think he's going to help himself in interviews. He's going to go somewhere in that 12 to 25 range. You mentioned John Collins, another breakout player this year in the ACC. Another seems like one of those safe picks, one of those high floor, low ceiling type of guys. He's going to come in, he's going to rebound, he's going to get you easy baskets. He hit 16 to 25 threes during shooting drills yesterday. He only took one during the season, so he's got some touch. We've seen it during the season. He's got a mid-range jumper. You mentioned Rab. I'm worried about Ivan Rab. I think he's going to slip this year. I don't think we saw the big improvement from 1 year to the next. We kind of expected as Cal's go-to guy that he would dominate a little bit more, but he didn't. And I think in today's league, if you can't stretch the floor from three and you can't protect the rim, you're forced into a backup role. And I'm not sure Rab does either of those two things. So the no improvement from 1 year to the next is an issue with Rab, and the fact that he doesn't do those things that the NBA now covets, which is shoot and protect the rim, and I'm not even sure he can really guard around the perimeter. So I like Collins moving up. I like Justin Jackson moving up. We mentioned Donovan Mitchell. I think outside the top 4 NCAA top guards, who is it? De'Aaron Fox, Lonzo Ball, Markelle Fultz, Dennis Smith Jr. I know Frank Ntilikina will be in there somewhere, but I think the next guard off the board has to be Donovan Mitchell.
And another guy who gained notoriety, Ricky, over the course of this season, he played on a really high-profile team, T.J. Leaf. He spoke yesterday, and he sounded, well, first of all, I'm not sure if you were over there, but he seemed to know so much about the NBA. He was like rattling off tidbits about teams, the arenas they play in. He seemed really well informed, and he also sounded confident that he could be a big man that could score at 3 levels. What have you seen from T.J. Leaf?
That's funny because I was going to say the same thing, that I've never seen an NBA draft prospect know so much about the NBA. Someone from the Magic asked him a question. He's like, well, the Magic were in the finals in 09. I'm like, what? But I think Leaf is interesting because obviously everyone wants shooting out of that 4 spot. And he can do that. Now, I think he only canned like 30 to 35 threes without looking at the numbers off the top of my head. So he wasn't exactly like a high-volume three-point maker. I also want to say he was UCLA's leading scorer. Now, obviously, Lonzo was the leading man. He was putting everyone in position to score. But, it wasn't just Lonzo Ball that helped UCLA go from 15 and 17 to one of the best teams in the country over the course of 1 year. It was also T.J. Leaf getting that type of skill set, very modern, power forward skill set in there. I think their games really complemented each other well. And, talking to Leaf yesterday, I was impressed with him. I think he's had a few big dunks. I think he's a little bit more athletic than people give him credit for. He mentioned that in the interviews yesterday, that he wanted to show off his athleticism a little bit. So Leaf is interesting to me. I still don't know, how much defense he's going to play, and I guess that's really what it's going to come down to in the end. I have him more in the 20s. Some people think he could be a lottery pick. But either way, coming from where he was a year ago, heading into UCLA, I think it's definitely impressive what he's done to put himself as basically a lock in the first round at this point.
Gonzaga's Zach Collins is supposed to be here today, not participating. Has he put himself in a different category, do you think?
I think he could be a top 10 sleeper. I mean, I'm not sure in terms of my personal board. I kind of have him, around that 10 to 13 range, but I wouldn't be surprised if a team took him top 10. He only played 17 minutes a game, so you'd have to really go out on a limb here, but he pretty much flashed every skill, and I say flash, but you only saw it in, here and there in doses. But, we know about the post moves. He's pretty polished with his footwork and his touch. He knocked down 9 or 10 threes this season, so he showed some range. He blocked a lot of shots, I think over 3 per 40 minutes. And he just seemed like a high IQ, smart guy, figures out the game. Physically, he's clearly, passes the eye test at 7 feet, 230. Good enough athlete. I think he's quick off his feet. We saw that in the Final Four. So I think Collins is a guy who could surprise people and go top 10 in this draft.
Something that Brian Colangelo said yesterday when he was talking to some members of the Philly media was that he felt like this draft, all the talk about it in terms of the top 10, he feels like it's been as accurate as any draft in recent years. But then he also, in looking at where the Sixers might be in the second round because they have 4 picks, he also seemed to think that there could be a lot of talent that slides down, especially in the early stages of the second round. Have you gotten any vibe as to where things might be in that area of the draft?
Well, I think that happens every year. It's like Chris Middleton is probably one of the 20, 25 best players in the NBA. He was a second-round pick. Parsons, second-rounder. Obviously, Isaiah Thomas has been the breakout player of the NBA this past year. So it's going to happen every year, and people, get so focused in on the top 5, top 10 guys. But the college veterans are typically the ones who end up being second-round picks who can, carve out a career in the league at one point or another. Also, the international prospects. There's certainly been a lot of examples of international prospects picked in the second round becoming good NBA players. So, I mean, if you're looking for some names, I don't know. It's tough to just project here because I think a lot of it has to do with what situation they're going to find themselves in. But, I mean, I look at someone yesterday like Devin Robinson. Devin Robinson just sort of looks like an NBA player. He's super long and he's super quick. He's a wing. Everyone wants wings right now. His skill level is probably a little low, but, like, I don't know. At a certain point, I think Devin Robinson could maybe be a guy who, because his feet are so quick and he's so long, he could be someone who could carve out a role defensively. I really like Wesley Iwundu, too, from Kansas State. I'm going to do a story on him for SB Nation at some point. He's someone who was not a shooter whatsoever his first 3 years in school. He developed the jump shot a little bit as a senior. He also had a big growth spurt in high school, so he came up as a point guard. He was playing on the Harrison's AAU team, coached by Andrew Harrison Sr. Jonathan Motley was also on that team, the Houston Defenders, back in 2012 or something, 2011 when they were in high school. And Iwundu just got a lot better every year. I talked to Bruce Weber, his college coach, about him, and he just seemed really proud of the leaps he was making. As long as that jump shot's good, I think Iwundu's going to have a place in the league.
We've kind of, especially when you look at the second round, because I guess there could be a couple schools of thought, maybe depending on what situation your team's in or how many picks you have. Do you go for a project, someone who shows raw tools and potential, or do you maybe use one of those picks, depending on how established your team is, to get a potential college veteran who could come in and compete? And, for the Sixers, they have, just thinking right off the top of my head, a Robert Covington, a 4-year college guy. Rashawn Holmes, a second-round pick. Who ended up spending 4 years at the college level, his last 3 at Bowling Green. Josh Hart seemed to be carrying the banner for the 4-year college guys yesterday. He said it was foolish to think that these guys couldn't come in. How do you view the 4-year prospect, and where do you stand on that, John?
I think it's every case is different, and in terms of draft strategy, it's all in the eye of the beholder. Some guys like to chase the upside and go for the big home run swing. Other guys will look at Josh Hart and hope that they find the next Malcolm Brogdon. Every case is different. I don't think you can look at previous prospects and use that as your way to evaluate players this year. So it's an interesting thing. That's one of the reasons why I love the draft process. I would love to be a fly in the room in every war room and every scouting department that goes on. And there's going to be guys who are going to stay in this draft who are young players. Like Svi, we mentioned. I don't know if he's going to stay in the draft or not, but 19 years old. I mean, I would take a chance on him in the second round, no question about it, after watching him shoot the ball for around 40% back-to-back seasons, and we just saw him yesterday torch the nets during shooting drills, 20-25 from 3. So, again, all in the eye of the beholder. I don't think there's a real strategy that you have to lock into.
Just because he's a local guy who played for Villanova, obviously, I'm going to ask you each for a Josh Hart take specifically.
I want to buy into Josh Hart. I really, really do. I like his game. He does a little bit of everything, a jack-of-all-trades guy. I worry that he doesn't have one go-to skill he can hang his hat on in the NBA. I wonder if he can create his own shot. I wonder if his three-point percentage was legitimate this year. Don't love the mechanics. I don't know if he's really a playmaker. Is he a wing? Is he a guard? I don't know. I'd take a chance on him in the second round, but I'd let someone else take him in the first.
Yeah, I like Josh Hart quite a bit, actually. I think that he's just someone who, like, if there's a loose ball, chances are Josh Hart's going to get it. That's just how he has been his entire college career at Villanova. It feels like for so many of these guys, you're saying the same thing, but, like, if the jump shot comes around, Josh Hart is definitely going to have a place in the league because I think he's a really gritty defender, and that's where he's going to have to, make his name in the NBA. Like John said, probably a second-round pick, but he's someone who's going to get every opportunity to earn a spot in the league, whether it's through summer league, maybe spends a little time in the D-League, but he's someone who will have every opportunity, I think, to carve out an NBA role.
Full disclosure comment here. In season, try to catch as much college basketball as I can. Tend to view mostly some of the higher-profile guys that are more mainstream household names. But then, you kind of get here and you try to read into the backstories a little bit. And I think we might have been standing around Semi Ojeley's table at the same time yesterday out of SMU, a guy who started his career at Duke. And he physically seems like a pretty impressive guy, and then just kind of took off this year where, I think, maybe played around 35, not even 35 games at Duke, and then he was the AAC Player of the Year for SMU this season.
Yeah, he is a refrigerator. I mean, he's like unbelievable. I mean, he only measured 6'5", but or at least in socks. You wouldn't know that he was 6'5". He's really strong, and he was, a Player of the Year in his conference this year, an offensive machine. And his bread and butter is that jumper. I'm not sure he's going to be able to blow by guys. I don't think he's going to be able to defend at a high level, but he knocked down a couple threes during scrimmages. He's pretty explosive around the basket. Quickness, not really so sure. He's going to have to be a really small ball four, but if he can make shots, he can play around the basket, bring some toughness. I think he's got the chance to carve out a role as an offensive specialist.
And as we get into some of these guys where you're trying to learn more about that we saw out there in the scrimmages yesterday, the first game, Frank Mason III, National Player of the Year for a bunch of outlets. He was at the point spot for one of the four teams. Where do you think Frank Mason might end up?
Yeah, I kind of like Frank Mason just because, that off-the-dribble shooting ability and the shooting range. I mean, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but he was around 50% from three for the entirety of his senior year. I thought he was the National Player of the Year this year, being someone who covers college basketball. He was the best player from the start of the season to the end of it. He was phenomenal, and you just hope that if he's able to hold his own defensively, he's tough too. I mean, no one's going to question Frank Mason's toughness, that's for sure. After what he went through growing up and then into Kansas, so he was a recruit for Towson, and then decommitted, went to Kansas, turned into National Player of the Year. So in the era where it feels like recruiting rankings and stuff like that gets so much attention, you just look around the NBA, though. Jimmy Butler wasn't a top 100 recruit. Paul George wasn't a top 100 recruit. Russell Westbrook wasn't a top 100 recruit. You never know with these guys. And I think that Frank Mason is an example of someone who worked really hard, became just an awesome basketball player as his college career went on. And at this point, why would you count him out? I'm not going to be the one to do it.
So this might be way too of a simplistic comment, and certainly, everyone knows front offices do their diligence and their homework, but if you see a guy like an Isaiah Thomas go on and do the things that he's done, given where he was drafted, the physical tools at first, you might see some things, and by the eye test, you say, oh, he doesn't have it all. If players like that start to perform, or like someone brought up Malcolm Brogdon, he was a four-year guy at UVA, had a great season. When things are in vogue, does that change perceptions from what you guys have found based upon the moment or the cycle, that sort of thing?
I think it does. I don't think it should. For example, if Porzingis wasn't so good, would Dragan Bender have gone top 5 last year? I don't think Isaiah Thomas' success should have any impact on your evaluation of Frank Mason. Right. I do like Frank Mason, and I would take a chance on him in the second round this year, but I think naturally, just as a human being, you look at Isaiah Thomas and you're like, oh, if he could do it, well, Frank Mason has every tool and skill and the work ethic that you need to be successful, but I wouldn't take him because Isaiah Thomas is successful. So it's an interesting question. It's an interesting debate in terms of how to evaluate players. I do think it happens personally, and I wouldn't allow it. I try and isolate every single player from one another. but I do think it happens, and every team scouts differently. Every team goes into this process with a different mindset, and they put stock into different things. But I do think that happens. I do think that successful guys in the past will impact your decision on similar players, in the present.
We've gone about 25 minutes on our inaugural Facebook live stream. Thanks to the Mevo. Our man Nick McCain is holding it down behind the Mevo device. And we've pretty much talked about the prospects that are here in Chicago this week and have not gotten around to the guys who are not here. So, I don't know, just trying to think with the time we have left. Maybe I might just rattle off a name, prompt the guy, and just have you guys pass the mic back and forth. And if, you want to double up on a few players, certainly feel free to. But why don't we just start with Markelle Fultz and what you thought of his season and where you ultimately think he might go, as far as draft slot, of course.
I'm all aboard the Markelle Fultz bandwagon. I think that he's someone who projects to be one of the best guards in the NBA moving forward. I think this draft is sort of being built up as Lonzo versus Fultz at number one. To me, it's no debate. It's Fultz all day. I saw him as a recruit 3 times, I think, before he got to Washington. Every single time I saw him, he was just so much better. And by the last time I saw him, before he was going into Washington, it was at USA Basketball Camp. It was with De'Aaron Fox, just all I think Monk, like all the top guys basically at USA Basketball. And he was by far the best player there, even with Tatum on the floor and those guys. So, what he did at Washington this season, I know they only won 9 games, but to me, he just has every tool. He's a master in the pick and roll. The chase down blocks alone, I mean, that's a type of skill that, it's hard to quantify really, but I think that just predicates NBA success in a way because it shows competitiveness, it shows the athleticism, it shows timing and intelligence, I think. He scores from 3 levels. He's a great 3-point shooter. He just does it all. I'm totally on board with Fultz.
I don't even think it's a debate. I mean, we should end this segment right now. It's Markelle Fultz and it's everybody else. Let's move on.
All right, cool. Short and sweet. Lonzo Ball, if we're just sticking to the skill set, everything that you like about him is...
Well, listen, you have to scout Lonzo Ball differently than other players because his most attractive strength is his basketball IQ, his feel for the game. On paper, there are a lot of questions about how his skills are going to translate. He doesn't have that mid-range game. He doesn't shoot off the dribble. People, obviously question whether or not he's going to get that 3-point shot off with those funky mechanics. I think he's going to be a good player in the league. I don't see Jason Kidd. Maybe a better Ricky Rubio is something, I hear a lot, and that's kind of what I see as well. I do think he makes his teammates better. I know that's a cliche, but I do think that's the case, and I think guys like TJ Leaf benefited from having Lonzo Ball in the backcourt. But I don't think he's the transcendent player who is going to change the game. He's going to be a solid starting point guard. I think I question defensively. I mean, we saw De'Aaron Fox just tear him apart in the NCAA tournament for 39 points. He struggles with getting through screens. He's a little stiff around the perimeter. And he makes those nice blocks, and he's a pretty good athlete. He's got the 6'6" size. He's going to need that jumper to start falling, and it fell in college. It's going to need to continue to fall at the next level. And the big question is, can you be an elite guard in this league and only average 14 points? Because I don't see him ever being a guy who averages 20 points a game. And if you look at the NBA All-Stars this year, not one NBA All-Star guard averaged below 20 points a game. So he's got to show that he can pick up his value in other areas, and we know he can with his passing, but can he be that lead guard who takes your team to that next level without being a big-time scorer? Because I don't think he's going to be one.
As far as some of the guards, and especially the point guards in this draft, certainly some are quicker and faster than others. I mean, if you just watched one game of Kentucky, you can see just how fast Fox is. But would you say that with the way the game is going, always hear so much about pace and that sort of thing, can the top point guard prospects in this draft, do you think they can all, Ricky, effectively create that type of pace at that position?
Yeah, I mean, just to circle back to Lonzo for 2 seconds, I think that, in terms of fit, he's the guy who, his fit is really going to determine his success. UCLA sort of showed NBA teams how you want to use Lonzo Ball. That's pushing the tempo, that's surrounding him with shooters. If the whole league wants to play like that now, assuming it's a copycat league and everyone wants to play the pace and space format, I certainly think there's a lot of guards in this draft who can do that. I mean, Dennis Smith might have been the most athletic guard in the country in college basketball this year, less than 1 year removed from a torn ACL. So he might not even been at his own peak athleticism, and he was still bigger and faster and stronger than everyone else. I think he's really interesting out of NC State. Fox, obviously, I think, when you're at Kentucky, you're going to have the spotlight. And I think Fox lived up to the hype and then some, really. Him and Monk combined were just so much fun to watch. I mean, just as someone who watches college basketball, they made college basketball a better game, better sport, because they were so dynamic together in the backcourt. So, yeah, it's a strong point guard class. I'm very interested in seeing Tilakina out of France as well. So I definitely think there's some point guards here who can push the pace.
When you look at the Sixers roster and you see guys like a Joel Embiid and a Ben Simmons once he's back healthy, no secret that shooting talent is probably something that the Sixers would like to acquire, whether through the draft or free agency. How do you guys, and each of you can take a crack at this one, see Malik Monk's shooting ability translating to the NBA level?
Yeah, I mean, on paper, Malik Monk is a perfect fit in Philly. He's a guy he's a shot maker who doesn't need isolation touches. He's not going to take the ball away from Ben Simmons. His offense comes by running off screens, leaking out in transition, and spotting up from three. And clearly, he's a good shooter. I mean, he's gonna make a ton of shots in the NBA. He's going to score plenty of points. For Philly, the question is whether or not he's a top 5 player in this draft, because they're going to probably have a top 5 pick. So raises that debate of, do you take fit or do you take the best player available? Because I don't think he'd be the best player available at number 4 overall, where they're projected to pick. Having said that, his skill set is perfect for what they need, and I do think that he's going to be I don't think there are any questions about whether or not he could shoot. That there's no question about that. I think a guy like Jason Tatum from Duke is another guy who I'd rate higher on my big board, and also gives you the same shot making, and maybe a guy who can create his own shot a little bit better than Monk.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. I agree with everything John said. I think Monk looks like just the obvious fit on paper, and then you wonder 5 years from now, would a team like Philadelphia maybe overthink it to talk themselves out of Monk because of what he can't do? But he was someone who was always known as an athlete. Coming up, he is like an elite level athlete. I think that's the difference between him and a lot of the other players he's compared to. But you just throw out some maybe NBA comparisons for him. I don't know, C.J. McCollum, perhaps, maybe Eric Gordon, someone who's like a 6'3" scorer like that. Those guys would be great with Ben Simmons. They'd be great with the Sixers. So I don't know how much he's going to give you defensively, because he is kind of small. His weight worries me a little bit too. He's also very light. But the kid just gets buckets. I don't know. He's elite level athlete, elite level shooter. He doesn't demand the ball. He's not going to be someone who's holding it in isolation for a while. So I think there's a lot to like about Malik Monk. And, if the Sixers have the choice between Tatum, Monk, Jonathan Isaac, I think it's a great problem to have, mostly because this draft, to me, especially in the top 9, is very deep and very talented. And, you just hope that Philadelphia's in a position where they can't pick the wrong guy.
You mentioned Jason Tatum from Duke, John Isaac from Florida State. Why don't we also throw in Mr. Jackson from Kansas? So as far as potential wings, 3-and-D prospects, how do you stack up that area of the draft?
I really like Jonathan Isaac, and I really think it's close between all 3 of them. I'd probably put Josh Jackson the highest. For Philly, he kind of repeats some of the same skills as Ben Simmons, is more of a point forward type. I don't know if that would, if he falls to number 4, I think I'd still take him anyway. I like Tatum. I think he's a safe pick. Offensively, just very skilled, very polished, passes the eye test with the 6'8" size, the 7-foot wingspan, a good enough athlete. I think he's going to score at the next level. I think Isaac is very interesting. 6'10", handles the ball a little bit. Didn't put up great shooting numbers, but if you've ever seen him shoot, he can make outside shots. Rebounded really well, showed some toughness inside despite the fact that he's got that skinny frame. And I think maybe his most attractive strength is his pick-and-roll defense. I think that's going to be a big strength of his, being able to block shots as a weak-side defender and kind of switch out in the perimeter and hold his own, guarding quicker players. So I think Isaac is very interesting. He doesn't have the production that Tatum had or that Jackson had, but it'll be interesting to see how Philly values those 3 type of guys, because I think they clearly could use a wing in that roster.
Yeah, and that seems like it's such a money position, obviously, right now with the way the league is going.
Yeah, I really like Isaac, but here's a question. I'll even throw it to John. Do you think Philly has Embiid set at the 5. They have Simmons set at the 4. I kind of think Isaac's best position is going to be the 4. So then it's like, if he's going to Philly, can you play the 3? If you're playing him at the 3, are you extracting the most value out of him that you can? Whereas Tatum, I feel like he's another guy who will oscillate between the 3 and the 4, especially with the way the league's going now. But I feel more comfortable in Tatum's skill set as a small forward than Isaac's skill set as a small forward. Even though, if I had to rank them, I'd really be torn between the 2, because I think Isaac's defensive upside is so high. And his offense, he's a child still, Like, he's a very young man. So his offensive upside, certainly by the time he's 23, 24, 25, he could be a really good offensive player. Then again, I also really liked a former player out of Baylor named Perry Jones III back in the day. Isaac kind of reminds me of him in a sense. 6'10", could do it all on the court. Why wasn't Perry Jones good? I don't know. He got hurt, but, like, he should have been good, I thought. So sometimes you can sort of be fooled into believing in those tools.
I feel like we're just kind of like getting rolling here, but as you look around the gym here at Quest, you start to see a lot more people, at least far more important than this guy on this end. I know, you guys, this is.
No, there are more important people
here
well. than us.
All right. Any last parting thoughts for those watching on Facebook Live?
Just Brian, we were talking about this before. There are people out there who say that the combine is a waste of time. If it's a waste of time, every GM and every coach would not come, but they're all here. They're here every year. It seems like this year more than ever. So I really do put stock in the combine. I think it's a great event. Even if the top guys don't play, we already seen the top guys. I want to see those second rounders who are trying to move the needle for themselves and kind of make an impression on NBA guys who haven't seen them live.
Yeah, I think just closing thoughts on the draft in general, it's going to be a really fun draft, especially when you look at all the big franchises who are at the top of the league. It feels like every premier franchise, the Lakers, the Sixers, the Celtics, they're all up there. I think the draft lottery on Tuesday night is going to be fascinating. I think the top 9 in this draft, there's so many guys who could fill so many different holes for those teams. I've loved the draft every year since I've been a little kid, and this is one of the most intriguing ones I can remember just because of the mix of top talent and, premier teams in the mix.
Awesome. Well, the insight has been fantastic, and if I just had to guess or had a hunch, probably be going to the well at least maybe one more time before the draft itself rolls around on June 22nd. John Wasserman from Bleacher Report at NBA Draft Was with 2 S's. Ricky O'Donnell from SB Nation at SBN_Ricky. I'm Brian Seltzer from Sixers.com. Nick McCain has been standing there for nearly 40 minutes holding our brand new, much appreciated Mevo device that we are now working into the fold for our digital content. So hopefully, while this was the first of our streaming stuff on Facebook Live, we'll have more to come in the future. Thanks for watching. See you.